Hello and welcome to the Proud to be LBUSD podcast series. I'm your guest host, Shelby Green, and today we have Dr. Tiffany Brown, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Long Beach Unified School District. So we're going to be learning about some of her past experiences and current roles in our district in this episode. Hi, Dr. Brown. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome
you for
to
the studio.
Me. Glad to be here.
So I'd like to start by talking about your trajectory as a student to an educator and what led you to study for your doctorate in education, and then continuing, what led you to pursue this type of administrative role in our district?
That's a good question. I appreciate you asking. And I was thinking back to some of my early experiences in school. I wasn't a perfect student, but I was a hardworking student, and I really developed good relationships with my teachers. And so that's something that I've taken into becoming an educator myself, is that I'm often not the smartest person in the room, but I am able to build really positive relationships with people that both allow me to learn from them, but also help to bring out the strengths that they have. So that's something that I think back to as a school experience that has led into what my administrative career has become. I began in the district 26 years ago as a school psychologist. So I wasn't a teacher. I started as a school psychologist. I had some background and a degree in counseling and mental health. And I really enjoyed the process of focusing on how people learn. And really benefited from working alongside teachers who were really focused in how to teach information. I was kind of more focused in how people learn information, and the pairing together made a really nice match. I didn't aspire to be an administrator. It was just kind of a natural path that happened for me. I followed some good advice from my dad, which was do the best job you can in the job you have, and opportunities will come to you, and that's proven to be true for me. So when people say, did you aspire to be in the role that you currently have? The answer is no. It wasn't the direction I was taking. I was really just focused on maximizing what I could offer and bring to the different jobs that I've had in the district.
And especially like you were saying, how you like to learn, how people learn, that makes sense how you stay in the school district and work your way up, especially at the administrative level. It's good to get an overview.
Absolutely, because what winds up happening when you become an administrator is the way that you had previously worked with students becomes the way that you work in support of adults and what adults need. And so I've found that the background that I have had as a psychologist has helped me in every other job that I've had, because to me, that work is really about understanding people and trying to find new ways to join with people.
Definitely. So moving on, as a previous assistant superintendent who oversaw student support services and school-based mental health in the district, how does that fall in line with your education and experience with psychology, just as what we just talked about?
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was in applied behavioral science, and that was really focused on kind of the sociology of communities and how people work together. I have a master's in counseling and a school psychology credential, and so that's where the mental health piece really came in through my education. But I would say even more impactful than anything I learned in college was the opportunity to do some really key internships in schools and in a couple of mental health clinics where I was able to kind of see the way what I learned in school came together in the practice of daily work. And then in the role I previously had as the Assistant Superintendent of School Support Services, that work was really, and that office is really about providing support for people who have different vulnerabilities, whether it's that they have a disability or a mental health condition, that they're in the foster system or struggling with attendance in school. Everybody that needs support through that office is in a situation that they might not choose if they could choose. And so the background in psychology and supporting mental health issues felt super important there. It also felt important because since families are coming to our district with children who have all kinds of vulnerabilities, they often come just needing some extra support themselves. And so I've just felt really committed and wanting to try to provide that extra layer of support for our families and our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially drawing back to what you had said in the beginning about your focus on how people learned. I can see how that ties into your background in psychology and how it's very all-encompassing, the way you work in schools and with your focus on mental health, because essentially like they go very hand in hand with kids, and their mental health is so prevalent in the way that they learn. And especially on an administrative level, it seems very helpful for you to have that background, and it just, especially even like the way you work with other people and how you communicate with the students. So it seems like, having a psychology background would be like exponentially helpful with students and with administrators.
Oh, yeah. I've never been sorry to have that background. In fact, I probably over time have underestimated the ways that some of those understandings of how people think and feel and how challenges can get worked through have helped. And then I had a really impactful experience growing up with a sibling who had a rather significant disability. He was a person who was nonverbal, so he didn't speak. Traditionally, he used a communication device. He didn't walk. He used a wheelchair. And so from a pretty early age, I was really tuned in to the ways that people communicate differently, and therefore the ways that they show what they want and need differently. And I feel like that probably more so than the psychology degree or anything I learned in school has been really helpful in just building my intuition around people. So I feel super grateful to have had him as a brother. And the ways that has influenced the work I get to do here in Long Beach.
Yes. And it seems just from our conversation that your experiences and your background even in psychology can be a great example for other administrators, and having on that, administrative level, the way that you can communicate and understand and like listen well to those people's cues will be good examples on how teachers should treat their students and communicate. And especially having someone like you in an administrative position would be very helpful for the entire district.
I appreciate that. I hope that's true.
Yes. So for our next question, also drawing on your experience as superintendent and mental health professional, what impact has those school-based mental health initiatives had on the district? And then also, what's the overall importance of such positions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think never has the topic of mental health been more important than coming through, I'll say through, not out of, but through a global pandemic where we've really seen people be challenged in ways that they've never been challenged before. So the school-based mental health work in our district has been important because we work in partnership with 7 community mental health agencies that provide services for students in our schools. And what's really key about that is that the idea that support service comes to school helps to remove the barriers that would exist to people getting to services. Sometimes just getting there is a stopping point for students, for families, for all the busy things that we know that happen in families. So removing a lot of those barriers and just bringing the support to the school, a place where students have to be, and hopefully we can create a layer of support that causes them to want to be there as well. That partnership with all of the agencies we work with has been really important. And then on top of that, it's helped the mental health professionals, the counselors, and the psychologists that are in our schools already learn from one another with those community partners, learn from what students need, from what they're benefiting from. And the way I've always seen it is that there's no need to compete because we, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, have enough mental health issues to go around. Yeah. And so it's really just trying to match the right type of support with the student need and determining who the best person to provide that support would be. So I'm super grateful to our community partners and the way that they have joined with us. And in times when we have had less resources than we have right now, those community partners have really stepped up and stepped in for us in our schools in a way that's allowed us to still provide a high level of care.
And it seems like what you're saying is that it goes both ways, especially with the pandemic. Like those in the schools who are already focusing on mental health now get the opportunity to use this like increased conversation to branch out into all the areas of school and just bring that conversation even more forward, which is especially needed.
It's
during
super
this time.
needed. Yeah. No, it's really, that's a good summary of what I'm thinking. And it is really needed.
Yes. So moving forward more to the topic of your equity initiatives, as someone who is heavily involved in implementing these new equity initiatives in the district, what was mainly the initial push for you and the district to start analyzing these new equity initiatives?
We've really engaged with the community in a different way and worked hard to have a more two-way conversation with our community, which has caused us to listen differently and really recognize that we have parts of our community that are not feeling well served by our district and that feel like we have a lot of room to grow. And so it's really just tuning in a different way. The impact of the pandemic and the civil unrest that has taken place in the last year, some of the key experiences that have happened, like the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the list goes on, unfortunately, have really caused us to look at who do we want to be as the fourth largest school district in the state. And it's caused us to reevaluate where we are through input that we've received and just our own observation of how we want to move forward differently in support of all of our students, and especially our students who have had more vulnerability in our system. So that's been the impetus, and Dr. Baker, in her still new leadership, a year into the superintendent position, has really guided our focus and stretched out into some different ways of thinking about the strategic goals of the district and how we want to line those up to just continue good work that's already happened and address things that have not been addressed as clearly as they could be.
Right. So then, especially like when you had talked about the specifics from the era of the pandemic and those instances that really brought forward the idea that you need to start implementing equity, other than that, what experiences while working on implementing these initiatives have been the most impactful or surprising for you?
For me, the opportunity to listen to students, it's always been a joy for me. I will say that in the last year, it's been such a wealth of information. And so really, the student feedback that we've received about really listening to the experiences that students are having in our schools, not just the experiences that adults like to hear, but the real realities that students are feeling, and trying to lead with those in mind and letting student voice be a guide in the work that we're doing, and really evaluating with students as the customers. Because the way I view it is you all are our customers.
Yeah.
Certainly there's a connection to your parents and caretakers who are responsible for you. But you're the customer, and you are who we should be working hard for. If the way that we are designing curriculum or creating policies or supporting your needs is not meeting the mark for you, then it's been really informative to hear about that and just be brave in going forward with what students are needing more of. Adults don't always like that.
Yeah.
So that's something to navigate, and that I think we're learning about, is that generationally, adults don't always believe that students should be really central and valued participants in the planning. But I surely do, and our district leadership surely does. And so we're really working hard to let student voice and community input be guides for us.
And what you've been saying about, like, even though I know this is new, the student voice, have you seen reactions, or can you tell like what the impact of these will be even in the future?
Well, I've seen some really important initiatives take off around requests from students. I'll give you an example is in several of our high schools already and more going forward, we have gender neutral restrooms.
Right.
That is an initiative that has been almost completely student driven. The idea, the planning, the outreach has been really driven by students recognizing that having a gender-neutral restroom on campus would create a more supportive space.
Definitely, yeah.
For some of our students, and it wouldn't take anything away from other students on campus. And I think that's been really key, is that sometimes the perception when we do something that's never been done before is that somebody is going to somehow lose something as a result of that new initiative. And the thing that's been really important in our equity work to talk about is that the things that we're doing just make the space better for everyone. Nobody's losing in those experiences. People are gaining. And the experience of focusing on some of our students who feel more vulnerable on our campuses just makes the environment better for them and everybody else. And that's something I think we have to keep talking about. But that awareness has really come to me through listening to what students are saying and letting them be our guide.
Definitely. And even from a student perspective, I can tell that as these initiatives are just taking off, even the conversations about equity being on campuses have like sparked the thought in the students' mind. And like with the gender neutral bathrooms, it just like propels them to make a change. And so I can see how it's important to have this on that school-based level, because then it feeds into their perspective in their mind and leads them to live a more equitable life and spread that to their future endeavors.
I just am continually impressed by the way that students don't usually need convincing around trying something that is new or innovative. We usually need to guide adults around that thinking. And one of the things that I just so value in listening to students is that you all come with a different frame of reference, and you're kind of the generation of everything is possible.
Right.
Right? And so with that, I think it leads us to places where we can all benefit from that, what I think is optimistic thinking.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I see that too. So building on the topic of equity that we're already on, for you specifically, what are some places that you've seen or experienced inequity in the workplace as a woman in administrative roles? And then also, have you seen any improvement to that, especially with these recent times?
That's an interesting question. Something I think a lot about. Gender dynamics are alive and well. And I think we've even seen that as we've seen the first woman superintendent in our district's history.
Yes.
Right? So 130 some years. And we've never had a woman leader. And then to be able to be working alongside her in a very different time has been a really unique experience. I'm somebody who has benefited from tremendous privilege in my life, but I'm really aware of what I'll say is a historical network of male thought and just being very conscious about the ways in which I communicate as a woman and wanting to be both strong in what I say, clear in what I say, emotional in a way that feels like the way I want to be, but always real conscious of who I'm talking with and how I need to bring that message to them. And I think that that's a way that many women will say that we need to be more thoughtful in how we're communicating, because there's definitely a more accepted way of communicating amongst males. Females have to be a bit more cautious. And so I've been trying to go bravely ahead with the work that we're doing and keep my focus around both representation of students, support for our staff, but really wanting to encourage our work in new and different ways. So those are some of the things that I seem to wind up thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
So it's an astute question on your part, and it's something that I think I'll continue thinking about as my career goes on.
Definitely. And it's important to make note of how, especially in our district, like the relationships are, to see what can be improved. And I think maybe your background in psychology has helped you to be aware of these things. But also as a follow-up, like in your opinion, any persisting inequities that you see, they can be related to the gender relations or not. How could those be improved?
Well, I think that that all inequity can be improved through, first of all, talking about it, right? Talking about the challenges that we face in a very open way, and then centering those who need centering. For us right now, that's our Black students, our students with disabilities, and our students of color that make up 88% of our district. So it's a really important statistic to say that 12% of our district is white. And in our work around equity, we have been centering student groups that need focus in a different way. And we've been doing that in the spirit of recognizing what the need is. So I mentioned our Black students, I mentioned students with disabilities, two groups that historically have not been well served in our district. And we are talking about that in a very overt way. We're calling out the data that we have around graduation rate, around discipline, around suspension rates, around attendance, and saying, this is not okay. And as a system, we need to do better than we've done. And I think that is the first step in making some strides to do something different. And then the other thing is really the recognition that I mentioned already, which is that focusing on specific student groups because there's a need only makes things better for that group and everybody else. It doesn't take anything away from other people. And I think that's something we need to openly talk about as well, is that if we're focusing on our Black students because we have data that says that this group of students should be doing better in our system, it doesn't mean that that focus is taken away from anybody else. It doesn't mean anyone else is losing in that focus. It means that we're putting the resource and the focus where we see the greatest need. And when we do better for our Black students, when we do better for our students with disabilities, we simultaneously do better for everybody and our whole community. And that's something that I want to talk about very specifically and really bring out for people who are wondering, wait a minute, if you're focusing there, then is my child losing something? No. The answer is no. It means we're focusing where the need is, and everybody will grow in that work.
Yes, definitely. And from my knowledge of just the administrators in this district, I can see especially that the board members especially, it's a very diverse range, like how you had been speaking. We have diverse population of students, and I think knowing that the leadership in our district is also diverse can have kind of the same impact. And what do you think about that? Like how helpful it is to see, for the kids' perspective, to see that leadership being so representative and how that can even impact how aware our district is becoming and how encompassing it is to all abilities and all races, ethnicities.
No, you're really astute, and you're calling on something, workforce diversity, that we're spending a lot of time thinking about. And our Human Resources Department is doing a great job in really paying attention around how we recruit teachers, because it starts with bringing people into our district as teachers. Most often our teachers become our leaders. And so really working as best we can to try to make our workforce more representative of our student population. And we definitely have room to grow in that area. I still meet way too many high school students who are African American and say that they've never had a Black teacher, or they've had one Black teacher.
Right.
And I think you could say the same for some of our Latino students. I think that we're really working on diversifying who our teachers become. And in doing that, there is something that is beneficial around students seeing themselves, seeing someone who looks like them, seeing somebody who may represent a piece of what their cultural heritage or their story has been. And even just into things like diversifying the type of literature that we offer in classes,
Definitely.
looking at our curriculum and saying, who's represented here? How are we giving students opportunity to see themselves in the history that's being taught, to hear positive messaging, joyful messaging, celebratory messaging in the history that reflects where they've come from. So those are things that we're talking a lot about, and that's something that really has also grown out of student input.
Yes, and especially what you're saying, I appreciate that idea of like lead by example, and in the way that you said that you seek to improve like the diversity not only in teachers but in like the administrators. It's from a student perspective, again, it can be subtle but very important to change like the whole perspective, because when you see yourself represented in a higher position, it makes you feel like you can get there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we hear that time and time again.
Yes.
We really do.
Yeah, it's definitely important. And even though certainly from your perspective, it will be different than a student's, but 100% like seeing those changes being made would impact, the future students and how they end up, what positions they end up in their life.
Absolutely. And it's really, it's kind of one of those dynamics where you start talking about diversifying who principals become, right? But that conversation starts with the teachers that we hire. And that conversation starts with the teacher credentialing programs and the university preparation programs and who the students are that get there. And then it goes even further where we're talking about, okay, well, we have all these pathways, but do we have an education pathway? Could we, as a large urban school district, be helping to prepare people to be teachers who go into these programs, who get these jobs, who want to serve in communities that they've grown up in? And the reality is we can improve in all of those ways. And teaching is a really hard job.
Yes.
It's a really, really hard job. So I have the good fortune to know and love so many teachers, both personally and professionally. And good teachers work really, really hard. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifetime job. It's a family job. Our teachers' families go to their classrooms, help do things. It's such a tremendous commitment. And so creating a pathway for more people to want to do that work, I think, is really important work that we're trying to engage in.
Certainly. So as we close, is there anything that we didn't bring up that you'd like to share with the LBUSD community, or touch on anything we've already said, maybe bring back the focus?
Yeah, the thing that I hope I've conveyed, but if not, I'll just explicitly state how grateful I feel to the way our community is working to come together, the way that I am seeing our community expect to be engaged with us in a totally different way than I've seen in my career. That will only make us better. It's sort of like Yelp reviews, right? We need that ongoing feedback all the time that tells us how we're doing and gives us opportunity to say, how can we make improvements and refinements based on what we're hearing from our customers? So that's something I feel really grateful about. I hope that will continue. And we are just really striving to create opportunities to hear more from parts of our community that don't often share, right? And so we're talking about language access and how we can make interpretation more widely available so that people who are not native English speakers are able to join into the conversation. We're really wanting to outreach to our African American community and making sure that we are really listening to the lived experiences that families are having in our schools and working to make improvements around the support that we're providing. And then lastly, the thing that I'll just re-highlight is that in doing that work, everybody wins. Nobody loses in that work. And that's the thing that we need to keep highlighting, because in some places I think people, specifically our white or Caucasian community, are wondering, wait a minute, there's a lot of focus on Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so does that mean that something is going to be different for my child? And the reality is that we are focusing on students who have all kinds of needs, but everybody gains through doing that. There's nothing that we're doing for any one group that would be bad for all the groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's only a good thing for everybody. So that's something I also really want to highlight in the initiatives that we're moving forward with.
Well, amazing. Yes. So those were all the questions. I'd like to thank you again for being here and speaking with me and having this podcast.
I'm super appreciative, and I think you did an awesome job. And your questions are great. They're things that I'll probably be thinking about later on. So I think that's the spirit of a good interview, is it makes you keep thinking about it.
Good.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And I think that wraps it up.